Evening, folks, and evening, sovereigns, and welcome to another Donegal show. Good to have you all here. And tonight, I've got a fellow host, MSI host, on, and someone that I've got to know over the last few weeks. We had a few Skype conversations. I've got Freeman Jack, and tonight, folks, we are going to take you on a journey through space and time, and we're going to try and make sense of it, and we're going to try and smash some of the paragrams that are out there, some of the superstitions, and going to see what this reality is really made of. And we're going to start off nice and slow, and we're going to build up to a crescendo. And I'll be looking for questions out of the chat box, because this transcends everything. This transcends all our petty squabbles and all our races and all our religions and all. This is actually what reality is. It's the essence. And,
the essence of transcendence.
Yes,
indeed.
Transcendence, indeed. So, without further ado, I'll introduce you to Freeman Jack, and we'll start our show. Jack, you're very welcome to the Donegal show.
Good evening, Donegal, and it's really good to be back on MSI again. I'm terribly sorry to the listeners who are expecting me to return to my the midnight slot on Thursday last week, but unfortunately I fell asleep.
Yeah, it can happen. It can happen. Are you going to come back on as a regular again? Yeah, because I miss you.
I have been put back on the slot. I'm not going to evict Nick from my old 9 till 12. I'm actually a bit more of a night owl myself anyway, yeah. So I'm going to take the old midnight on slot, which also gives me a little leeway as well to perhaps explore some subjects in greater or lesser depth, rather than being constricted to a 3-hour show weekly.
Yeah, I noticed that about you too when I was in Korea. Like the 8-hour time difference, everyone else was in bed, and you were up, like you were on the Skype, and you were furiously typing, and I got some good advice from you. You know,
you caught me on a blazing high at that particular time. I tend to go through sort of biorhythmical phases, intellectual phases, where sometimes it's just all hooked up and jumping, and sometimes it's a bit dim and dismal.
Yeah,
and I definitely felt the vibe. Those exchanges were very bright and informative.
Yeah, I enjoyed them. I got a lot out of them. On a personal level, I got an awful lot out of it as well. You know.
Well, that's the point, really, here of sort of coming on air with you tonight, was that personal level is probably as important to me as it is to you, in as much as I think that some of the gain that you got from our discussions was a rational view of something that you had held as a superstitious belief about something that had actually happened to you.
Yes.
And that in the logical explanation of consensus and non-ordinary reality, we begin to have at least, I mean, again, please don't anybody assume that the models that I give are in any way an accurate description of reality. They simply are a more accurate model with which to describe the human experience. Yes. And as such, they're just a tool.
They're open to interpretation.
They're open to interpretation to a certain degree, and to some degree, we all need to construct our own models of our own reality. So they are, they're the Lego bricks with which people can then go on to explain their own existence to their own satisfaction. And that's really what's driven me to this point, was that I, through my epilepsy, through my temporal lobe epilepsy, and through my pursuit of hardcore psychedelic drug consumption in my teens, 20s and 30s, and pretty much to this present date, really, I have calmed down distinctly.
Yeah.
But the combination of those two has launched me into realms that most people never experience. Yes. They're probably the realms that are normally restricted to, the miracles of saints, as they're described in the Bible. They're the sort of burning bush experiences sort of thing. Booming voices from out of nowhere issuing you with books with strange symbols written on them that will shift and wriggle when you try and look at them.
Yes.
which is actually, funnily enough, the most peculiar experience, because I had never understood that particular experience until that piece that I wrote and sent to you, Donny, about the numerical mainframe.
Yes.
And I realised that the numerical symbols that I was seeing on the pages of that book in that particular experience were very likely the symbols that you would need to describe this three-dimensional mathematics.
Right. Well, okay. Now, you say that this is only open to interpretation, your model, but your model is it's actually getting a lot of attention from the scientific community. A lot of people in that community are identifying and proving things that you've said to me. So let's take it down to its core and explain to people what your version and what your model of reality is.
Okay. Well, I suppose the simplest description would be digital virtual reality. Now, most people think of that as sort of holographic images on a computer, but in this sense, I'm using the words in their most literal sense. Digital in the respect that reality would appear not to be analog. It would appear to be in packet form. It arrives in discrete chunks. This can be discovered right down to the subatomic level. Photons are packets of light. They're digital. Yeah, light isn't analog. It's digital. Yes. It arrives in packets, in chunks. So that's what I mean by digital. Virtual, well, quite simply virtual, not real, not substantial, okay, insubstantial. So we have a reality that is constructed of packets of data. It's insubstantial, and obviously reality is our experience of our own existence. Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, in that description of reality, we have two distinct halves of reality. We have something that I used the term consensus reality to describe, and I tend to resort to a term I think was actually plagiarised by Carlos Castaneda, and that's non-ordinary reality, to describe everything else. So essentially with consensus reality, we have this reality that we construct communally, as a group. The streets that we all walk down, the houses that we all live in are constructed out of a consensus belief in the existence of those objects. Okay. Now, when we step outside of consensus reality, we can do that quite simply. I give the example of the skydiver. Now, for the skydiver, I can only imagine the experience, the reality that a skydiver experiences hurling himself out of a plane. Yeah?
Yes.
So that falls outside of my consensus reality. I have to receive that as given information, as somebody else's experience. For those skydivers, their consensus reality is only in consensus with the other group of skydivers. Okay, yeah? So although we still have a separate consensus reality, but this is now consensus reality that only has a very minor overlap with the general consensus reality. Yeah. So you can see how reality has all of these various subsets where various people's specific experience defines them into a selective consensus reality group. Now, it would appear that under extreme circumstances, there would appear to be some sort of a time code. If you've ever dealt in raw video back in the old days, we used to have time code as a little digital signal that would run on the bottom of the frame. You wouldn't be able to see it on a normal TV screen, but the professional equipment would pull it up and you'd see the time code scrolling on the bottom of the screen. Well, essentially, it would appear that for reality to be consecutive and linear, it appears to have what is effectively a time code written underneath it. So it knows where it is, or certainly so you know where you are on it. And under certain extraordinary circumstances, certainly temporal lobe epilepsy, certain extremes of psychedelic abuse, certain extremes of sedative abuse, essentially switch off the senses so much that eventually you lose the time signature. At this point, you're now into non-ordinary reality. You're no longer in the shared reality that everybody else exists in. This non-ordinary reality is still constructed exactly the same as consensus reality. So your experience of it is of being ordinary. The only thing that's non-ordinary about it is some of the things that happen there. Now, this possibly explains the sort of mysticism and the superstitions about sort of devils and demons and angels and fairies, and because these are all, I hate to revert to jargon here, but these are archetypes. These are archetypal characters. The reason why the Grimm fairy tales were written about those characters was because those were the cultural characters of mythology. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were the stories that their grandmothers had told them. Mm-hmm. So these creatures exist in the cultural subconscious, and when we're extracted from consensus reality, we enter into a world of our own creation. So largely, it looks like ordinary reality, but it can sometimes be occupied by these creatures that are simply summoned up from our own archetypal impressions. So if the sensation of non-ordinary reality suddenly starts to feel rather strange, you suddenly start to realise, well, this isn't where I was a minute ago. What's going on here? And once that strangeness sets in, you start to get the paranoia, the looking over your shoulder sort of sensation, which is where the demons and the elves and the all jump in from the subconscious to occupy that justification for fear.
Okay, so what you're saying is that conscious reality is it's based on the reality in which a group of people or a culture of people believe to be reality, real, our day-to-day living. And what you're saying is that when we take a psychedelic, or in your case a psychedelic, or you go into your epilepsy, that time frame is altered. You're in actually another reality that is real to you, but the time frame has stopped, and that you can conjure up these archetypes that Jung covered it from your subconscious, and they come into this reality.
They come into the non-ordinary reality.
The non-ordinary reality, yes.
I mean, bearing in mind that non-ordinary reality experiences have also been shared by. I've had 4 reports now of people on acid trips who have swapped bodies and have spent the entire trip in the other person's body, experiencing the other person's brain, which is also something that led me to some fairly stark conclusions about what the brain actually is. And it isn't the mind.
No, it's
the hardware that the mind expresses itself through into the body. And again, the whole issue of digital virtual reality is not only am I suggesting that this world around us is virtual, but we're virtual as well.
Yes. But when I fall, Jack, when I fall and I hurt my knee or I hurt my elbow, it hurts.
When you get shot in code of conduct or whatever it is, these bloody teenagers are all shooting at each other, do you fall down dead on the floor, or do you have to respawn?
Yeah, well,
that's exactly essentially. I mean, Tom Campbell explains it beautifully. He uses the World of Warcraft and the Sims computer games as an example. Essentially, those games both have a rule set. If you're walking around in the Sims hologram, in the Sims virtual reality, your Sim character cannot walk through other characters. It can't walk through walls. Yeah, when you switch the computer off and you come back to the game, it's in the same state or progressively in a linear phase to some future state. It's not at some random place where you've never seen before.
Yes.
So this is essentially the reality.
There are rules to our reality.
And the reality that we experience is essentially a numerical mathematical algorithm, and it is a self-evolving algorithm, and as such, the aim of it would appear to achieve greater complexity, and the observed actions of it would be those of a mechanism, let's say, an autonomous mechanism, which has built into its very rule set the preferential maintaining of that which is beneficial to complexity, and the erosion of that which is obsolescent or isn't producing complexity. And we can see that in action with things like biological evolution. We can see that in action with the actions of the decay of stars and of subatomic particles.
Yes.
So essentially, we can see the evidence of a numerical. I mean, Stephen Wolfram. I mean, this is the other. You mentioned that various scientists are coming to these inescapable conclusions, but largely the specialisation of the sciences. The reason why I've apparently arrived at this elegant model with which to use as a metaphor to describe these things is simply because I completely lack all of those specialisms. I have been forced in my explorations of my own experience to research into every field, into the occult, into esoteria, into the hard sciences, into religions, to try and explain my own personal experience. I mean, the fact of the matter was that there were only two reasonable conclusions to draw from the experiences that I had been having, and that was either that I was travelling through time somehow and experiencing things in a completely different realm, or I was completely insane. And largely, I spent most of those years just simply concluding that I must be insane, because I came from the very strict gold standard Newtonian mechanistic model, and I was the very first to jump down people's throats when they began talking what I believed was woo-woo nonsense at me.
Yeah.
And now suddenly I find that a lot of this woo-woo nonsense is actually completely bound up within the rule set of this model for reality that appears to... it doesn't overthrow anything that's gone before it. The glory of digital virtual reality is that it allows every other field of endeavour to be contained within as a subset within it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, Tom Campbell calls it my big toe, my big theory of everything.
Yeah.
And theory of everything is a simplified version of unified field theory.
Yeah.
This is essentially a theory that describes all discovered and observed data, which, frankly, the Newtonian model, the dogmatic sort of primacy of matter model, just simply doesn't go anywhere to explaining. And we had things like the quantum paradox, where the scientific model that was required to describe the quantum realm and the scientific model that was used to describe the Newtonian realm were just acknowledged to be incompatible. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, we have a single subject of physics relying on two completely different descriptions of reality, and just simply shrugging their shoulders and going,
yeah, yeah,
we don't know.
Yeah, just for the listeners there, just you should all download Freeman's pod with Tom Campbell. It's excellent reading. It's definitely worth listening to. Tom Campbell as I don't think anywhere on the internet have I seen a bad comment about Tom Campbell.
Funnily enough, I always do my negative research on all of my potential guests, and Tom Campbell was the first one that I had come across. The only negative comment that I was able to find about him anywhere on the internet started with, I watched the first half an hour of your video.
Yeah. Go away.
At which point I decided that I would read the first half of their comment.
Yeah. But that's a fantastic interview. It was very well done, and he was a gentleman, and you were a gentleman. Came across very well.
And again, the glory of being able to discuss things like this with Tom is that he has actually got a model that is a reasonable description that contains all of my experiences without any paradox.
Yeah. I when I went back to college a few years ago, it was an engineering degree, but it was done in the science section of the college, so it was a science and engineering degree. But I'm certainly no scientist, and I'm certainly no academic. But I watched Tom Campbell's My Theory of Everything, and I watched a few of his videos, and I done a bit of research on him, and I went in with questions to me physics lecture and my maths lecture, and they just poo-pooed it. It was beyond them. I knew it was beyond them.
Well, did you watch that Isaac Asimov memorial lecture?
No,
I sent you the
link. Yes, I did.
Do you remember the response from that panel when they're presented with a fellow genuine research physicist presenting them with his data and the best that they can do about it is a nervous laugh and a "can we please move on quickly?"
Yeah, can we please? That was 1 hour and something like 6 minutes into that lecture. Mm-hmm. Just explain to people there on the chat box about
basically, that. Basically, it's a research physicist talking to a panel of physicists about physics to a audience of physicists and physics students, and he presents what he has found in the mathematical algorithms that drive quantum theory. And what he has found is computer code. Not something that looks like computer code, it actually is computer code. Not only is it computer code, it's a very specific type of computer code. It's a machine code. It's the same code that Google uses to refine search engine results.
Unbelievable.
Okay, and when you load this software onto a computer and run it, it generates these beautiful fractal images.
And they are beautiful, absolutely stunning.
Yeah, exactly. And all that this group of scientists can possibly do about this revelation about their subject is titter, giggle, and hopefully move on very quickly.
Yeah, I don't think he was. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think I also sent you the link to some of the Eric Laithwaite.
No.
Okay, well, certainly most of my peers should remember the Eric Laithwaite children's Christmas lectures from the early 70s.
Oh, yes, yes, you did. I remember it now.
He was the inventor of the maglev train.
Yes.
And a highly respected scientist. I mean, and those lectures that he gave for 8 to 12-year-olds were the most inspiring, awesome things ever to have happened in my childhood. I mean, seriously, just completely changed my life.
Yeah.
And he treats the audience as an adult audience. There is nothing about those lectures that is even remotely aimed at a child's audience.
Yeah.
And in those lectures, I mean, he does things like he gets an 8-year-old out of the audience and gives them a 180-pound flywheel on the end of a 4-foot pole. And by spinning it up to 200 RPM, this 8-year-old child is able to lift it over his head.
Yes, I remember. Yes. Yes.
And basically, Eric Laithwaite got ostracised by the scientific community for mounting a piece of wood, a plank of wood on a roller skate, perpendicular to the wheels, and by swinging the pendulum and ushering the roller skate in one direction. So basically, if you swing the pendulum, the roller skate will rock backwards and forwards. If you give it a slight push in one direction, it will continue going in that direction.
Yes.
And Eric Laithwaite's question was, how does the pendulum change through 90 degrees to drive the roller skate forward?
Yes.
And that was the reason why I sent you that particular part of that lecture, because in there he's showing how electromagnetism appears to be polarized.
Yes, down with that sort of thing, Jack. How dare he broadcast that on television? How dare he get children interested in science? Let's put the comics back on and the cartoons. Let's put on Scooby-Doo. Mm. Those programs are all gone now. Mm. You imagine 200...
I still watch the children's lectures just out of interest, to be quite honest, and they're an absolute farce now.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what child would actually want to bother to sit through one, because they're so talked down to and belittled by the subject material.
Yeah.
which is a real shame.
That is a real shame. I actually remember I was very young, but I remember catching the tail end of those shows. I remember that, man. Once you sent me the link, I could just remember just barely.
It is one of those.
Oh yeah.
Oh, he was great.
Yeah,
he was the one with the flying aluminium plates and.
Yeah, fantastic. But anyway, getting back to the subject.
Yes.
So what we're saying is that the reality is digital. It's in the ether. Would I be right in saying there's an ether? There's like a mix of soup.
Well, I mean, if it's virtual, then actually no. There would have to be some sort of a computational structure, and that's my computational mainframe piece is actually an attempt to describe a physical structure that could exist virtually and project a holographic reality.
Yeah,
because this is some of my problems with this are things like how comes when I leave the room my bookcase is still on the wall as far as everybody else is concerned.
Yes,
I mean there's issues like with persistence with digital virtual reality theory, and I struggle with the concept of persistence in digital virtual reality theory. So I went to look for an answer. And I found in some of the mad ramblings of the glorious Buckminster Fuller, who is completely impossible to watch and will completely rot your brain trying to concentrate. Barking mad.
Made up his own words for things. Made up his own language.
Absolutely. Would make them off. Yeah, would make up words off the cuff if he couldn't think of the word to describe whatever he was wanting to describe. He was to make up a new word for it. But his presentation of tetrahedral geometry just suddenly struck me. I was doing lots of base 12 research and sacred geometry research at the time, and there was something about that lecture. I think it was his Everything I Know lecture, which is about 3.5 hours long, and how I picked up this one little gem out of there, I have no idea, because my mind must have just been melting by the time it comes on. It's about an hour and a half in. But he basically says that because we exist on the surface of a sphere, that the dimensions that we experience are not best described with a cube. That although we build roughly cubic buildings and in small scale geometry, cubic things are easy for our minds to grasp. When you actually think truly about the geometry of nature, you have to think about it tetrahedrally. That the plumb walls of your buildings are in fact not parallel. They're in fact describing a triangular path to the centre of the earth. If you put a spirit level on one wall and a spirit level on the other wall, that spirit level isn't reading the parallel between the two walls. It's actually reading straight downwards.
Okay.
And the straight downwards from each of those two walls is actually a different tangent. It's so tiny that you don't notice it on the scale that we work at.
Yeah.
But what this means is that everything in our world is described with an up and down axis, which is actually an in and out. Yes? Because up is actually out and down is actually in. I mean, Buckminster Fuller would insist that his students stopped thinking about upstairs and downstairs and think about them as instairs and outstairs.
Yeah, that's
just
correct.
Simply as an intellectual tool to correct this thinking. And when you start to understand this, when you're dealing with segments of a sphere, if you take a quarter of a sphere, that describes a tetrahedron, a three-sided sort of computational mainframe. It struck me that a tetrahedral grid would indeed be able to sort of transmit tidal waves of information, and that the tidal waves of information could interact in exactly the same way as pebbles in a pond interact when the ripples meet, and you end up with an interference pattern. And for a long time, I've been working on the fact that if this is a digital hologram, then it would have to be based around interference patterns. It would have to be the interplay of more than one data stream in order to be able to. I mean, the usual example, which is sort of a steam cloud, with lasers shining onto the steam cloud and constructing the image in midair.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the way that's done is that every time that a laser crosses over another laser, you get a bright spot.
Yes.
Okay, so the lasers are scanned across each other to make these light bright spots in midair.
Yes.
Well, that's pretty much the same way that this interpolated wave of algorithms would interact to create a holographic reality.
Are we talking frequencies? Are we talking different frequencies?
To have created it in the first place.
Yeah. So what we're saying is that the reality is geometric, and would we be right in saying that it has the 3 dimensions of like space and time and space-time direction? Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah. So the three dimensions of space and 1 of time.
Yeah.
Although, again, thinking of time as a dimension is a bit of a misnomer, because and this is the other thing as well, is that most people would think about base 12 and just think, oh, well, that's the numbers 0 to 11, and think no more of that. But, of course, in that, the numbers 10 and 11 are actually base 10 concepts.
Yeah, you get 2 unique numbers in that.
You need 2 unique numbers,
yeah.
And those we are not given.
Yeah.
I mean, I have done my research. There is nobody has done this work. It strikes me that the only way of unthinking base 10...
That the brain isn't the mind. The brain is sort of like an antenna or a receptor, which we use to pick up,
decode
and pick up the frequency of this reality.
Mind would appear to be out there,
outside. Yeah, outside. So you're out of your mind.
Most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time, same as that. But so how come my life differs from your life? How come my perceptions, how can I get this out? How come my perceptions, my life differs from, I get different things out of different information than what you would get? How come, are all our lives, are they individual or is it collective?
Both.
Okay.
I'm sorry, there's no quite simple answer there.
Yeah, go ahead.
We are like the fingers of a hand, but we are ignorant of our connection to the hand. We all think of ourselves as individual. We can all look at each other and go, well, the little finger looks at the thumb and goes, well, I don't look anything like you.
Yeah.
Middle finger looks at the index finger and goes, I'm much bigger than you.
Yeah.
And all of them are completely ignorant of the fact that they're connected to a hand.
Yeah.
And to some degree, some of these experiences in non-ordinary reality are a matter of returning to the hand. I often compare it to the way that an amoeba behaves. When an amoeba is moving around its environment, it basically sends out a tentacle, a tentative tentacle, a thin tendril, and senses the environment. And if it finds something beneficial, some food or something somewhere that it thinks is going to be heading towards food, it basically pours its entire body into that tentacle. And that's how an amoeba actually moves. And sometimes it feels for me like I'm pouring in and out of parts of myself.
Yeah.
And certainly there's never been any, in all of my experiences in non-ordinary reality, there has never been any awareness of me being anyone other than me, even when I've been a dog or a wolf or something.
Yeah. And
I was entirely me while being the wolf and thinking, why the hell am I only 2 foot off the ground? Why am I running so fast? Why am I running so fast in the dark? Oh, that branch is going to get me in the eye. Oh, wow, I managed to miss it. And these are kind of the intellectual thoughts that are happening while I'm experiencing being a wolf.
Yes. And did you get that through a psychedelic experience, or did you get that through your epilepsy?
Those particular ones were petit males. They were epilepsy.
Right, and as that
possibly induced. I mean, largely. As an epileptic, I really don't advise anybody to go doing what I did with psychedelics. I would routinely induce really over the top fits through my consumption of psychedelics, and most of my non-ordinary reality experiences were in fact due to near-death experiences brought about due to the extremity of the fits that I'd induced due to my consumption of psychedelics. So it's not a good thing out there, kids.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
This is something to do if you already consider that you're clinically insane and beyond help. largely. And this is really how I've ended up kind of the sort of tribal shaman that I've always been kind of viewed as by my peers, is just simply because I've always been prepared to go out there to the extremities of experience and bring back whatever I find.
Yeah.
And I suppose my sort of common man approach allows me to then decant what I find for my fellow man.
Yeah.
And it allows them not to have to do the hardcore drug abuse to be able to achieve the revelation.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. So,
and where does novelty fit into all this, Jack? Where,
well, novelty is a primary drive of evolution. Evolution is simply the production of novelty and the maintenance of beneficial novelty and the erosion of detrimental novelty. So if, diabetes is an evolutionary adaptation. In some respects, there's bound to be some particular civilization at some point where their diet meant that the insulin deficiencies or whatever of diabetes was a beneficial adaptation, and that's why it's been maintained within the genome.
Yeah.
So we only have to look at the biology around us to see how an self-adaptive machine can produce biological forms.
Yeah.
And then my suggestion would be that having then produced the biological forms, the next dimension that it had to explore complexity through was conscious animals.
Okay.
And that's where you get the higher animals, the dolphins, the whales, us, monkeys, dogs, self-aware animals.
Okay, so novelty, would I be right in saying that novelty is... let me see. It's nature. It's the survival of the fittest, and we are novelty. We
I
put
don't know
novelty
if
together.
it's not necessarily even survival of the fittest. That's a very much maligned term and probably not very appropriate to use. It's more survival of the most unique. Yeah, the most adaptive. So if you come up with a unique adaptive skill that then gives you a benefit simply in diet, for us, it was probably the reason why we're these hairless apes is because we probably discovered mussels and seaweed and became came down from being arboreal apes to being shoreline apes. And so it wasn't, it wasn't the ability to conduct war on other apes. It was just simply a change of diet.
Yeah. Yeah,
certainly there's some suggestion that there has to be some explanation for the expansion in the human brain as an organ because of the amount of omega-3, which is the fish oil, that is required to actually produce a human brain, and it just simply wasn't there in the diets of the higher apes.
Yeah. It seems to me that we're heading towards an age of more like the computer power. I think it's a double every
18 months more.
That's how it is, something like that.
Doubling capacity and halving size every 18 months.
Right, so we can eventually we'll be able to create our own realities and just plug into it and forget all our troubles.
Well, first of all, I would suggest that Moore's law has already been breached and is probably 5 years on the far side of it, but the stock exchange don't want to tell you that because it would collapse them.
What's Moore's law?
That's this doubling in every 18 months. Moore's law. And essentially it's driven the computer revolution, that this assumption has always been held to be true. And it was true up until 5 years ago. It is no longer true. Computers are now no faster than they were 5 years ago. They're simply 5 times more complex and have reduced in size. That isn't actually going to carry on much further. We're already reaching limits of nano-tunneling on the size of the disk. We've got things like graphene in the pipeline, which may revolutionise it a degree. But again, we're not talking... But when it comes to plugging into our own reality... You already are.
Yeah, you're on it.
You're already in your own digital virtual reality, and the reality that you construct from your own digital virtual reality is driven by your own paradigms and your own preconceptions. Yeah. So everything that you've been taught, everything that you've thought, everything that you think that you know constructs the reality that you experience. Tom says that it's about 80-20. Personally, I say if it is 80-20 and 20% of it is imposed and 80% of it is personal, that 20% that is imposed is still subject to your personal interpretation.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. You could make that 20% sort of run your life more. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Exactly. So essentially, it's 100% at your disposal. There may be calamities and there may be controversies and catastrophes in that experience, but how you experience those calamities, catastrophes, etc., is entirely down to your own conception.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a glorious revelation when I realised that I made Streatham snotty. I was driving back through a rain-soaked Streatham, begrudging every red traffic light, hating every moment of this dirty, grim existence, and suddenly the dawning of MBT struck me in that moment, and I realised that I made Streatham grotty. And ever since, I've been making Streatham a nice sunny place with tree-lined, and my experience of Streatham is now completely different. I enjoy driving through Streatham. Genuinely enjoy driving through Streatham. My experience of Streatham has changed entirely. Mitcham is a different matter.
Yeah.
Sorry, anybody that lives in Mitcham, that was a bit of a sly quip. But yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
essentially, anything that you don't like about your experience, the first thing that you have to analyse is why am I creating this for myself? Yeah. And I know that some people have got grave problems with things like catastrophes, global catastrophes. Well, did that little girl ask to be, create the man who shot her? And these are very difficult questions to answer. But again, like I say, this is a model. It may not be complete. It may not answer all the questions, but it bloody answers more than most. And it leaves you with a rational way of exploring your own experience. And that's what we're here for.
Do you think that this knowledge has been suppressed and hidden from us and been maybe...
I think they have no goddamn idea. This is what I'm getting from the scientific community. Every time I come across an example like that I gave you with the Asimov lecture, every time I come... Stephen Wolfram is a perfect example. Stephen Wolfram wrote Mathematica. I mean, the man is an absolute genius. And he saw biology in maths. Yeah. He saw biological forms falling out of his mathematics.
Yeah.
And he constructed a computer program that would generate these mathematical biological forms. And instead of exploring how the two compare, how natural biology and mathematical biology actually compare and what perhaps is driving the two, he then went on to monetize his discovery and is now Mathematica is now a mainstream computational tool for scientists and engineers and probably doing much greater good with it. But he seems to have completely missed the point. He seems to have missed his own point.
That's the thing I see in the scientific world is that if you're a physicist, you're a physicist. If you're a biologist, you're a biologist. If you're a chemist, you're a chemist, and never the twain shall meet. Well, and I think that's a lot of the problems there.
Exactly, and possibly one of my saving graces is my complete lack of academic training, that I've had to deal with this myself, so I haven't been constrained by any fields or any colleagues looking down their nose at me. I mean, everybody looked down their nose at me. Everybody's just completely viewed me as a nutter, and I've got used to that. It's only been recently that anybody's been going, oh, blimey, you might actually be on something.
Well, I'll tell you something. I've been watching a lot of Charles Manson's interviews on YouTube.
Yep.
And 10 years ago, I would have said Charles Manson's a nutter. Charles Manson makes absolute sense to me. The things he comes out with. I just think the man was about, even still, he's an old man now. I think he's about 50 years ahead of his time.
Again, funny you should mention that, but this is actually a key point as well, is that all of humanity, if you take any measurement of human experience and plot it on a graph, you will end up with something called the bell curve.
Yes.
And this is basically a bell-shaped plot on the graph under which all of humanity is contained.
Yeah.
And in the top of the bell, we've got the majority of humanity is under that sort of main banner. sort of 80-90% of humanity will fall within those sort of 20 or 30% of the graph.
Mm-hmm.
And at the front edge and the back edge of the graph, you have the extremities of experience. Yeah. And at the back end of the graph, obviously, you've got the people that would be considered to be dullards or Luddites or stick in the muds. Yeah.
Yeah.
And or in terms of physical performance, weaklings. You know what I mean? Whatever. And at the front edge of the curve, essentially, you've got the psychiatric patients.
Yeah.
Their experience of reality is so far outside of consensus reality that they've got no way of interacting with normal society, and that's really somewhere where I've found myself in large parts of my life. I have been so incoherently blathering about my discoveries that I have just simply been viewed as insane, and quite rightly so. I probably would have come across to any normal, reasonable person as somebody who had completely lost the plot.
Yeah, well, losing the plot and being insane are two different things. I mean, if you think of the words insane, I see someone, if someone says to me that person is insane, I don't think that person's mad or I don't know what word I could use for it. I don't see it as that. I see it as a different viewpoint. They see things. If you look at the word for dyslexic, I think it goes back to Latin, and it means abnormal. And I looked it up, and it actually means that you have an abnormal means that you look at the world in a different way. Now, you may have trouble writing, you may have trouble reading and with numbers, but that doesn't mean that your brain's any less powerful than my brain or anyone else's brain.
I would actually suggest that psychological disturbances like schizophrenia would be much less prevalent if people had a grasp of what non-ordinary reality consists of, because then their experiences they wouldn't have to associate with madness. Correct.
Wouldn't have to associate with medication and with the so-called normal reality that we're supposed to live in.
I mean, certainly somebody who's ambulatory within ordinary reality while experiencing non-ordinary reality can obviously be a danger to themselves and to others, and obviously we do need some of the caring professions to look after the poor people like that. But most people's delusional states are simply that. They're minor delusions and can simply be conscribed to non-ordinary reality and not trouble them in their ordinary daily life at all. I'm minded of the time, gentlemen. It's 2 minutes till by my clock.
Yeah, we're going into 9 o'clock. Do you want to go for a cigarette break?
Oh, right. Oh, superb. I could do with a refill on my cup of tea.
Well, no bother.
So if you want to whack a tune on.
A couple of songs from Johnny there, and we'll come back after the break. And if there's any questions in the chat box. All right, folks, and welcome back. Got Freeman Jack here with me. And just before the break there, we were talking about the nature of reality and what Jack's opinion of reality is and the tools that he's modelled it on. And I would agree with everything he says. I've looked into it. It's a heavy subject. It's a hard-oiled subject to get your head around. The only reason that I was able to get sort of a basic, and I mean a very, very basic grasp on the subject matter is that I would have studied physics, I would have studied science, I would have done mathematics at college, university level. So I would have a basic concept of what he's saying. And there's a saying that I heard one time in college, and it came from a maths lecture, that biology boils down to chemistry, chemistry can boil down to physics, and physics boils down to maths, and maths is a universal language. But anyway, I've got Jack back here again now, and just for the last hour of the show, Jack, take it down to a human level, and what does it mean for you as a personal, if you want to answer the question, what does it mean to you to be a sovereign? How do you go about it in your daily life, and how do you come across it? You know.
Well, first of all, I've always been a free thinker, a bit of an independent soul, And so, you know, I mean, having lived as a New Age traveller, having lived amongst the biker scene, having lived amongst the squat scene, having sort of a large branch of sort of artists, musicians, and what have you amongst my peers, I've always understood that freedom was a matter of independent thought more than anything else. Mm-hmm. The capacity to hold your own beliefs and to try not to be ignorant about the source of those beliefs. So if you believe something, try and find out about that belief and find out whether or not that belief is justified. And so I suppose sovereignty wasn't really a specific term that I encountered other than in terms of royalty, etc. Up until really very recently, up until the sort of joining things like the TPUC. Hopefully most people know that my name predates the modern British Freeman movement and actually stems back to my time as a New Age traveller. But when I came across the concept of sovereignty, in fact, I think it's Vin largely that educated me about the concepts of sovereignty, and then on doing my research in digital virtual reality, on realising that we are the projector of our own part of consensus reality, that we project our 80% of consensus reality out into the world. We're not the receivers of reality. We are actually the projectors of it, the net creators of reality. That as a creator, you are uniquely sovereign. There is no question about your sovereignty. There is no higher authority.
Yes.
You are your own creator. You are the creator of your own reality.
Yes.
So I then was completely struck by the sense of duty and responsibility that came with
it's overwhelming, isn't it? Sometimes when you think about it, it's overwhelming.
I try not to get overwhelmed. If I feel overwhelmed by a subject, I do my best to ignore that feeling, because that's certainly something that has been imposed on us to a large extent, and is something that the media is very much largely responsible for creating. The dumbing down of civilization is almost completely accomplished. A fait accompli. So I do my best never to be overwhelmed by a subject. I mean, to the extent that I very nearly burnt my brains out working on that tetrahedral maths theory before I had the numerical model.
Well, if you look through history and you look at a lot of the mathematicians that come up with formulas and breakthroughs, an awful lot of them committed suicide, and an awful lot of them were in mental institutions, because they got a concept of reality that the normal person can't really deal with.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is one of the things as well, is that my experiences in non-ordinary reality may have been extraordinary, but what's, I think, possibly more extraordinary is that they're never remembered directly like a dream. The memory of them is usually stimulated at some later point as a kind of deja vu experience. Yeah. And the actual experience of returning to ordinary reality, to consensus reality, is one of complete absence of any awareness of the preceding interval. Yeah. It would appear that the incongruity, the fact that the two realities can't mesh because of their model of reality. Yeah. So because because there's no way of joining these two versions of reality that they've just experienced in their current model under their current paradigm, the brain just simply rejects it. Yeah. The mind kind of fudges over it. Yeah. And it's usually at a later date. And this is, I suppose, really, I should really use a few examples of how extreme some of these sort of non-ordinary reality experiences have been, and some of the things that sort of persuaded me to look further into them and not simply to write them off as delusional, which again is something that I had done for many years. This is something that has happened to me since childhood, and in childhood I would more often than not sort of incarnate into non-ordinary reality as things. So I would often be a talking thing, and that my non-ordinary reality as a child was very much more fantastical and world of imagination.
Yes,
clearly the world of imagination. And the more adult I became, the more convincing non-ordinary reality became, the more ordinary non-ordinary reality became, and I would begin to experience completely ordinary everyday events through non-ordinary reality, but with a time frame and a place that's completely different to where I was experiencing them from.
Yeah.
So I began to have experiences of fully non-local mind, where my mind was not with my body. It was still my mind. I was still me. I was still experiencing the world as me, but I was not in the chair where my body was. I was somewhere else. Yeah. With some of these experiences, I actually came back with information that I just simply couldn't have acquired any other way. In other experiences, in one in particular, I spoke with it's actually the only one that I can remember where I spoke out loud. I spoke out loud with a soft Irish accent and really startled myself.
You're right, okay.
So, you know what I mean? I suddenly was in this phone box.
Oh, yeah, I remember you telling me that, yeah.
Yeah, and had the phone in my hand and was just completely in a phone box, talking on the phone. You know what I mean? There's nothing weird about it. I was in a phone box. Yeah. Only when I went to open my mouth to talk to whoever it was that I was talking to on the phone, I had a broad, soft Irish accent, which I remember being startled by. But that experience was so short-lived and so extraordinary in its kind of impact that it was just too much to even think of when I returned to ordinary reality. I mean, that literally would have been a matter of 2 or 3 seconds of ordinary time. Yeah. And I travelled to a completely different place, and the experience then as well was one that I disbelieved the recollection of it, that there were things about it that I disbelieved that told me that this was somehow imagination or fantasy. And later I had corroborated as bloody the actual reality of what would have happened under those event. So my preconception of what that event would have been like was at odds with what the event was like, but then later I discovered that no, actually that's what it would have been like had you have been there. Yes. Yeah. And this again is another experience that's absolutely generic to non-ordinary reality experiences, is that of disbelief. When you come back, you can't believe that you've just been the way you've been. Yeah. You can't believe that you can have acquired something from there that other people haven't got or don't know or couldn't experience. It's because it was just ordinary. Yeah. Yeah. Run of the mall reality. Mm. Yeah. Well, when I slipped into sort of, I don't know, the 1700s or whatever it was, I was there walking up the road, cussing the council for stripping off the tarmac and leaving us with bare bloody cobblestones, and thinking how much of a nightmare that hill was going to be to drive down in the winter. And there I am walking around in bloody 17th century. Yeah, yeah. You see, bloody road planners. What were they thinking of? Why? I was hoping you would come on, and I know you were supposed to be on last weekend, but I was glad that you come on tonight. The reason why I wanted you on is that when I was away the last time, we had some good conversations over Skype, and just today in the chat box earlier on today, there was a bit of a debate going on about when the first sovereign constitution of Ireland was released. Was released. Some people are saying it's 1919, some people are saying it's 1929. Well, what I'm trying to get across, especially in this interview, is that there is so much more to being sovereign than a piece of paper. It doesn't matter. See, Billy Maguire... There is no piece of paper that can Exactly. Then Billy Maguire, sovereignty, and different people have educated me on me and how to be sovereign. They have educated me that I was always sovereign. They can't take it away from me. They can't say to me, no one can point to a date
The only date that I can point to is my birthday, the day I was born. The only other date I can point to is today, because it's what I do today. So there is no piece of paper anywhere. There is no person anywhere. It's not written in stone anywhere that says when I was sovereign and when I wasn't sovereign. I came to the realization when I came to TNS that I was a sovereign, because it was told to me that I was in charge of me, I was in control of me. Not necessarily freedom. I think if you're sovereign, it's not freedom. It's slightly more constrained. It's more constrained because you have to follow a certain rule book, because you have to respect the other person's sovereignty. If you're free in the total sense of freedom, like you can do whatever you want and with no consequences. That's what I see the freedom as. But when you're sovereign, there's consequences to your action. You walk a narrow path, and this thing about when the first Constitution was sent out, it means nothing, and it should mean nothing to anyone, only historians, because we have moved on from that. And the way that I come into this site is that all my preconceptions, all my insecurities and fears are left outside the door. I come on to the chat box. I like to shoot the shit and have a bit of crack with the people. I listen to other people's opinions, and I try and get my opinion across. And all my prejudices are left outside. And then whenever I get off MSI, I might take those prejudices back on again, and that's the way life is. But eventually, when you keep coming back to this site, those prejudices, someday you'll just say, I don't want to lift those. I don't want them anymore. And that's where I've got to at the minute. So it doesn't matter to me if it was 1919, 1929, 1969, 1999. It doesn't bother me, because I'm sovereign and I don't need a date and I don't need a piece of paper.
The only thing that I would suggest that is important about Irish sovereignty is simply that I believe that a nation can only be truly sovereign if it's a democratic republic, or through the democratic republic process has decided, elected as a body to run some alternative version of governance. You know, I mean, as far as I'm aware, as far as I'm concerned, a sovereign nation can choose a dictator for all I care. Yeah, if that's their sovereign democratic choice, then so be it. You know what I mean? As long as
on a national level, and we're not at that. We're not at that level yet in this country, and that's why MSI is here.
To a degree, you are so far head and shoulders above anything that we have in this country, because at least you have a written constitution to be able to point to, and that constitution, to some degree, protects the people.
Yeah,
Whereas here we've got meaningless pieces of paper that weren't even ratified by the bodies that would have made them official pieces of paper.
Well, I think the evolution, I don't call it revolution anymore, I think the evolution of human consciousness is going to come from this country. I think that this country was deliberately kept down. We're the wealthiest nation in Europe, and we've been deliberately robbed, starved for a reason. And I think the reason is that the peoples here were islanders. We're off from the mainland of Europe.
It's entirely possible that you're actually the primary descendants of an entirely seafaring nation.
Yes, there's that to it as well. There is that.
There's the cottages, the Stonecroft cottages, all around the inlets, around Skye, some of the inlets around Scotland, and in the Scandinavian coast. And they couldn't work out what they were. They were these stone elliptical buildings with a hearth, but no roof structure.
Yes.
And they suddenly realised that they were exactly the same size as a two-man coracle.
Yeah.
So they basically sail inland and then upend their boat
correct.
if the weather got bad while they're out at sea.
That's correct, and use it for a shelter. There is no definite 100% proof. There's a lot of theories out there where we came from. But there's no one. Some people say the south of Spain. Some people say further. There is no definite proof of where we came from.
Well, again, this kind of goes with my naked ape theory of us having been coastal dwellers. As we evolved out of arboreal apes, we would have evolved into a coastal dwelling ape. Hence, we lost all the fur because it would have simply got in the way in the sea. where he acquired the aquiline nose, because most of the great apes can't put their heads underwater without drowning.
Yeah.
There's quite a few sort of biological adaptations. Our hair follicles are all aligned for the runoff of water when we're upright. So there's all those sort of... We're definitely designed as an aquatic ape, and there aren't any other aquatic apes. So it would suggest that the origins of humanity are coastal. And if that's the case, then it would be a very short intellectual leap from a coastal bald ape to an ocean going bald ape on a log.
That's quite a thought, Jack. That's quite a thought, man.
Well, this is it. I mean, all of the evolutionists all pursue land-based migration patterns to try and explain human evolution.
Yeah.
And they all completely ignore the possibility of an entirely seafaring race.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And I like I say, I suspect that the original Pictish peoples were probably pre-Ice Age, and as such, the English landmass would have been exposed as part of the European continent, and so they would have simply have been the sort of coastal dwellers of that exposed European subcontinent edge, which would basically be, the extremities of Ireland, the extremities of Scotland, Shetland, Norway.
Yeah.
All of those would have been shallow coastland river, inland inlets.
Yeah. I know Michael Tazarian, I know he's been debunked in a lot of stuff. But he said that instead of the Western philosophy is that all life came from all culture came from Egypt and worked its way over to us, and his theory is that all culture came from here and worked its way, because he believed in Atlantis. Atlantis was between America and Europe, and that all life came from there and came to Ireland first, and then hopped along across into. It's a theory, but it's maybe.
I don't hold with the Atlantean part of it. But
neither do I. No,
there is certainly mounting evidence for a eastward passage of a lot of what are now considered the Eastern arts, of languages and things, the Vedic traditions. There's about 250 something or other points of coincidence between the known ancient Vedic traditions and the known ancient Druidic traditions.
Yeah.
And that's just completely impossible by pure chance alone. There's the tartan-wearing, ginger-bearded skeletons that recently turned up in the Mongolian desert.
Yeah,
and have been scurried away by the Chinese, who would rather they weren't talked about too much.
Yes, definitely. I think the whole.
We also, just to add to that list, we also have the. Oh, bloody hell, what was the civilization? One of the great Mediterranean trading states, Phoenician. We've got a Phoenician trading vessel just been discovered off the coast of Cornwall, 4,000 to 6,000 years old, and it's on its return journey. It's loaded with ingots of tin and empty olive oil and wine flagons. So it's basically like a milk float picking up the empties, and on its way home with its load of tin that it exchanged for its latest load of olive oil.
Yeah, I mean, we've even got maps that...
This is possibly 4,000 years before the Romans arrived. We're trading. We're a trading nation with one of the major European trading states.
Yes.
And trading in high value,
high-end stuff.
Yeah. And metallurgy, this is the other point as well, is that a large part of metallurgy was drawn out of the mystic practices of the Druidic culture, that most of their kind of wizardry was based around metal elements.
Yeah.
I mean, throwing metal powders on a fire to get a blue flame or a green flame, or to get a woo out of the audience, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And through that, they discovered they would have accidentally discovered a lot of the amalgams and mixtures that then subsequently led to our modern metallurgy.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. But even the maps, even what you're saying there about the seafaring idea, even though we've got maps showing the North Pole as a landmass, and a detailed landmass way before anyone was up there, like, you know. And
I think you find that's the Antarctic, but the Arctic's just a big ice cap. But yeah, no, the Antarctic. Yes, there's what's known to be an ancient map that shows what appears to be the Antarctic subcontinent without the ice sheet.
Yeah,
and that hasn't been known for at least 10,000 years. That coastline hasn't been seen since before the last ice age.
It's mental. It's absolutely mental. You see, this is what it means to me to be sovereign. It means that I question everything. I question because the view of history and the view of especially the Irish history that I've been given is absolute rubbish. It's absolute tap. Irish history ends with you start with the Sulcan Thomas and the rebellion. Goes on through the different rebellions against the occupation. It goes up to 1916, then it just dies. Irish history dies at 1916. We don't hear about the internment camps after the Civil War, or the so-called Civil War, where the Crown forces wearing Irish uniforms turned their guns on Irish people. You don't get to see all of the hidden politics, all the trouble and strife during the 40s and 50s, when we were supposed to be neutral, but we're allowing the U-boats.
Yes,
U-boats on one side. Sorry.
There were a lot more reasons really for ERA to side with the Germans due to their various politics than there was to side with the English.
100%. I can actually tell you that they did side with the English up around where, not far from where I lived. They sided with English because it was the occupied 6 counties. But after World War One, the Crown forces had a glut of mustard gas and poison gas, and they didn't know what to do with it. So they put it all into a couple of ships, and they sealed it off the coast of where I'm from, and they torpedoed it, and they sank it to the bottom of the sea, so that the pollution of the mustard gas and the poison gas was away from the UK, and my coastline got it all.
Very nice.
Yeah, all lovely.
That's your great British Empire for
well, that's it. You know, and I've heard the saying in this chat room. You know, the reason why the sun never set on the British Empire was because no one trusted them in the dark. You know, and there's no disrespect to anyone who's British or from the UK. I'm talking about the Crown forces. I'm talking about the Crown forces that will do the same to you as they do to me. It's certainly no malice intended to anyone from the
well, I mean, there's another point as well, is that the sort of the racism argument. I've done an awful lot of research into genetics. My eldest son actually did a genetics and biochemistry degree at university. He's now just about to start his PhD on the 19th, so I'm hugely proud of him. He's managed
excellent, well done.
A funded PhD at Edinburgh University. I mean, how much could you possibly drop in shit and come out smelling of roses? Yeah. Having grown up in Deptford. Excuse me. So the point being that genetics is a description of the underlying agent of the impatterning of a human body and human biology.
Yeah.
But that base code is then acted on through an agent called phenotype, through the environment. Each cell is basically its own little island, and it interacts through the world by a phenotype, via its environment, via the foods that it gets, the energy that it acquires, the warmth or cold or whatever, and that this biology actually physically changes DNA. It switches. It is in fact the mechanism by which the adaptations to the human body have evolved over the years.
Yes.
And that those adaptive changes, once they're set into the code as an available adaptation, it's possible to revert to type. So if you take away the phenotype pressure on the genome, then the genome will revert to type without that phenotype pressure to the new trait.
Yes.
And so as a consequence, the entire construct of racism and the whole apparent sort of attempts of the elites to maintain some sort of control and to alter behaviours and to change this and to change that is in complete ignorance.
Correct.
Of the fact that if you're eating British spuds and you're eating British carrots and drinking British water and breathing British air, you're British.
Yes.
The colour of your skin is temporary. The accent in your language is temporary.
Yes.
All of that will be adjusted by evolutionary pressure due to phenotype.
Exactly. It's like on a watered down version of that, Jack. It's like religion. If I was born in Egypt, I'd more than likely be a Muslim. I happened to be born in Ireland, therefore I didn't choose it. It was chosen for me. I was born or I was baptized into the Roman Catholic faith. If I was born in Nigeria, I could have been a Christian, or I could have been a local religion, you know. And you just hit on a good thing there about racism, you know. It's a thing that people, especially white people, don't want to talk about. They don't want to debate because the politically correct, the way things are now at the minute, everything has to be politically correct. If I talk about racism, if I can talk about it to a certain degree in public, but if I go beyond the pale and ask the really tough, difficult questions, people look at you and go, well, "That boy's a bit of a racist," and I'm certainly not. You know. I work in Africa, and I can tell you this: racism works both ways. I've been called a cracker. I've been called a blue-eyed devil. I've been called blood clot. I've been called what was it? Something else? There was another. I can't remember. But I mean, they are
derogatory terms.
Exactly, and they can be just as racist as me. You know, if I took that notion, I went to Angola, which is a Portuguese colony. I was called a gringo. You know, so I mean, it works both ways. Ignorance works both ways. It's not just me. It's the society that's been bred into people. It's another divide and conquer.
Well, I may be English born and bred, but with a mere drop of the Irish in me. I've got a quarter Irish in me, but about a quarter of my family is West Indian.
Yeah.
And my wife is Spanish Italian, and therefore my children are Spanish Italian, English Irish.
Yeah. My wife came.
We actually worked out where my wife should be sent home to. Should be sent home.
Well, that's the Cameron Centre. Yeah, go ahead. Go home. Yeah.
It's 30 miles off the coast of Sicily in the middle of the Mediterranean.
That'd be nice, wouldn't mind going there.
I hope she's walked with her boat if she has to go home at any time.
Oh, if she has to go home, you go with her, man. That sounds like a nice. But my mother's ancestors came from Scotland. They were planters. They came over here. They were Protestant planters that came over here back in the 17th century. My father, his name was Walsh, and that translates to Welsh, and that comes from Wales. And if you translate the word Wales, it means land of the foreigners. So, I mean, I'm a mix of everything, you know.
That's funnily enough, my family name translates to Strang, which comes from the same root as strange.
There you go. There you go.
Which is also applied to foreigners.
Yeah, there you go. So I see. This is the thing with the argument today in the chat. Not the argument, sorry. The debate in the chat room about whether it was 1919 or 1929 that the sovereign constitution was put out. You see, I have gone so far beyond that now. I don't even see. Some people call it Ireland. Some people call it Era. I just call it a bit of land on a big blue rock in the middle of. Sorry, not even in the middle and in space. We're on the
Oh, I claim an absolute sovereign territory of my own.
Yeah.
It's the area that's defined by the gap between my ears.
Yes.
And all of its contents.
And all that is a receptor for the mind that's outside us.
Which is a good point. We're 20 minutes before 9, so I would love to still go to areas where I feel that this model could really help people who are having difficulties with irregular reality, shall we call it, of whatever kind.
Go for it, Fred. You go for it. I'll give you the last 20 minutes. How's that?
Okay, well, I mean, to be quite honest, I'd like to refer to yourself even with your broad Roman Catholic upbringing and the dogma that would have been imparted to you. How large a part do you now see that playing in your experience of non-ordinary reality? Absolutely
none. It's gone. I treat the whole thing now as a fiction.
Okay, no, what I meant is now that you understand that experience was probably a projection of your own archetypal fears,
yeah.
How much do you associate that projection of archetypal fears stemming from the dogmatic sort of Roman Catholic upbringing?
It would have been yes, it would have been 99%.
It would have been an absolute belief in the existence of devils and demons.
Yes,
is really where we're sort of going with this, and that is such a huge problem to me. I have intellectually now completely rejected the concepts of good and evil.
Yeah,
and I know that we're kind of straying into Crowleyist territory there, but I reject no previous considerations on it. I'm not prepared to follow there. Their considerations. I have considerations of my own, but if it's Crowley-esque, I don't really care. It's my own. It's not Crowley-esque.
Okay.
And if basically if this is true, then essentially it describes everything from the occult power that occult sects feel that they acquire from their occult practices and ceremonies. It explains things like religious experience. It explains various forms of psychosis and delusion.
Yeah, back to archetypes, yeah.
And it explains them all without needing to refer to any sort of superstitious belief in the supernatural, in any kind of deity. I mean, that was the glory. I was literally, when I experienced amongst my psychonaut friends, we describe it as the resonator, this booming voice that occasionally interrupts the psychedelic experience, a bit like a Santa Claus type character. It feels like I've never actually seen him or him. Yeah, I guess it is a him. And nor is anybody else that's kind of had similar experiences, but I have heard an almost identical experience to my experience with the book being issued with the symbols, and it's actually out there in a crop circle video. There's an old beardy guy saying about how he'd been instructed to do what he'd done, but couldn't understand what he was being asked to do at the time, which is exactly my experience. Yeah. But in some sort of a religious paradigm, I would have taken that to have been the voice of God.
Okay.
I would have had no other model on which to base that experience. It would have either have been I'm completely insane, or that was God. God just spoke to me. And in some sort of religious bloody paradigm, your behaviour is going to be so unrealistic because of your ignorance of what just happened, of your projection of of some. I still don't really understand that experience. Most of my experiences, I've had some kind of corroboration to be able to make some sort of sense out of them. But that was the one. That one really slapped me upside the head.
Yeah.
still to this day, I can sort of remember it really well. I can remember all of them really clearly. This is the strange thing about experiences in non-ordinary reality, is that they seem to imprint themselves on the memory in a much more three-dimensional way than ordinary memories, and they certainly don't seem to fade with age. I mean, most of these that I'm talking about are 20 or more years ago that I experienced them, and yet I can still walk around in amongst them. I can still experience every microsecond of those experiences, and that's very unusual as well. I don't understand why those experiences should be so impatterned that they're more memorable than real memories. And that was another thing that kind of drove me to these kind of, why should my memories of not here be stronger than my memories of here?
Yeah. Maybe subconsciously it meant something more to you. Maybe, I don't know. Only you can answer that.
Well, these are some of the complexities that I've been faced with this. But I underwent sustained 15, nearly 20 years of psychiatric treatment.
Yeah,
for this stuff. I mean, I was medicated with more different types of psychiatric bloody medications than I can actually call to memory now.
Yeah.
Many of them, things like antipsychotics, which had to be administered with an anti Parkinsonians drug to prevent the tremors that they would induce.
I know what I've been down that road myself. Have you ever heard of a drug called olanzapine?
There are so many different.
Oh my God! What a terrible!
I haven't taken a psychiatric medication now for probably 20 years nearly.
Oh, same as that. I think what they do in the psych. Well, my experience of psychiatric was that they take you in. You're at your lowest ebb. They break you down and they try and rebuild you as a citizen. if you get my drift, to go into normal reality. And maybe some of the things and some of the experiences you have had in life are certainly far from normal.
Well, I have to credit Nick Nomick with this, but he came up with the glorious line, "I used to think I was mad and now I just know I was livid." Yeah.
Exactly, man. Exactly. I experienced a psychiatric. I remember I seen something. I talked to you about it. I seen something. I couldn't comprehend it, and it almost drove me insane. And
made you, or at least its effect on your paradigm, led you to no other reasonable conclusion in the model that you had at the time.
There was no information in the model that I had that this does not compute, and my brain froze, and I just couldn't get it in my head. And I went and I told a psychiatrist, and she said, "Oh, you're psychotic," and she gave me a load of nice drugs. She gave me olanzapine, she gave me beta blockers, and she gave me a couple of other things. They actually gave me injections. I don't even know. I didn't even ask what was in them.
Well, here's a point that must be made at this juncture, is that you just said exactly the key phrase that took me probably 12 or more years of being medicated to realise. You got sent to a psychologist, not a psychiatrist.
Yeah,
a psychologist can only medicate. They can offer no other therapy.
All therapy is great.
And that is a clear distinction, that if you are going to seek help for a mental health problem and they send you to a psychologist, expect nothing other than medication and a pat on the back and a well done, keep taking the tablets. Oh, they're not working enough, take a few more.
Here's some more. And they actually give you a tissue when you leave so you don't drool when you're walking.
Oh man,
yeah. But after all that, I went to a tiny little woman who was a counsellor, and she wasn't even
talking therapy.
She just within 3 weeks.
Yeah.
You know,
and that would have been a Reichian therapy. She would have been practicing there as well. Talking therapy is essentially, all talking therapies are Reichian in their origin, and essentially that's a form of cognitive behavioural therapy where you literally remap the brain through the act of thinking and talking about something. Did she get you to write anything down?
She did indeed. Draw pictures, write it all down, and talk to her about it.
Right, so she got you to write it down and read it aloud?
Yeah.
Right, the reason for that is that speaking aloud and thinking about something that you're going to write occupied two different hemispheres. when you write something down and then read it aloud, you do something called hemisync, which is basically when the two hemispheres are separated due to their tasks, but are suddenly linked due to the data that's coincident between them. And you find that out of that sort of cognitive hemisync, unbidden thoughts, unbidden memories, unbidden realizations just pop into your head. Yes. And that is the actual action, the direct action of that particular therapy, is to synchronize the two hemispheres of the brain who normally handle the two functions separately by bringing them together on a single task, and a task of memory and a selective memory of, a harmful past event or whatever.
Yes.
And that may bring something to the fore that had been a completely repressed memory or a completely repressed realization about the situation. And with this new memory or new realization, suddenly your timeline is more complete, and you can begin to move through the experience, rather than to be stuck in a kind of repeated few frames of a loop running round and round and round.
Yes.
And especially disturbing for you, I should imagine, seeing as it was quite a frightening experience that you had. If this same persistence of memory that has happened to me through my non-ordinary reality experiences happened to you, then I should imagine the memory of that event was probably clearer than any other thought in your mind.
I have never been. I think that I have never been more afraid or alone in my whole life. I'm not going to go into what it was. You know what it was.
Yeah.
And it was that I just couldn't get over it. It just stuck with me for 4 years before I could even talk about it.
I mean, I suppose for me, I was quite lucky that I was persistently immersed in and out of this kind of non-ordinary realm from early childhood, and kind of grew up with it. And I honestly thought it was normal. I thought everybody had fits.
Yeah.
I got to 20 or 30, and it was only when I turned around to a friend and said, "You know what it's like when you faint?" And they went, No, I've never fainted."
Yeah.
"What, never?" "No, not ever." Oh, right, okay. And then I'd ask a few more. "No, I've never fainted." "Oh, there was that one time I kind of felt a bit woozy and had to sit down." And here's me spending my entire life kind of falling down on the floor, flapping about, and thinking that was something that everybody did when they were not well, or, hurt themselves, or it was usually whenever had some major injury or had been so unwell that my body chemistry would go haywire and sort of go into shutdown. But
yeah.
So taking lots of psychedelics is a really sensible fucking career.
Yeah, that's a real.
And the craziest thing was that I knew the whole time. I mean, I described them as heroic doses, but on one particular occasion, I decanted out about a half a pint of tincture off of about a pound of magic mushrooms. And I can assure you, there was no pleasure at all in putting that to my lips. I was petrified.
Yeah.
I was petrified. I knew that I had my life in my hands.
Yeah.
In that glass, that there was the potential to induce such a catastrophic temporal lobe epileptic seizure that I never came back.
Yeah.
And yet I still put it to my lips and swallowed, and I still to this day don't really understand who I was there standing with that thing in my hand. I certainly couldn't do it to this day, not now I've got children.
Yeah.
But in those days, I would literally do anything that occurred to me.
When you're young, Jack, you're bulletproof.
I am actually bulletproof. This is the bizarre thing. Not that I am somehow, so egotistical to think that I'm, impregnable. But my life, you just don't want to know the number of hideous high-speed motorcycle accidents, the completely totaled cars, the industrial accidents. I've been hung off a crane and swung through a solid bloody building wall on the edge of the gym. I've crawled out of cars with the roof flattened onto the body shell, and
done that
should have been sat upright in the steering wheel, and could only come to the conclusion with all of these repeated events is that I'm not due to die yet. And funnily enough, that brings me on to another experience, which is I've had several near-death experiences, but one in particular was a real stark one, and again, sticks in the memory like no other. And I had some hideous injury, went into the light, passed out, went into the light. I think it's hard. They kind of blur into each other. I think this may have been when I passed out at the birth of my first son.
Right.
And I passed out with my head down the toilet bowl.
Okay.
So consequently, my unconscious body had no way of regaining a blood supply to my head.
Yes.
And it was purely chance that the birthing partner that my partner at the time had taken with her to the hospital realised that I was absent, knew about my epilepsy and came in search of me.
Fuck.
Saved my life.
Yeah.
About 15 minutes later, I was witnessing the birth of my first child, having just died in this toilet.
Yeah.
And I think it was that particular time. But anyway, went through the dark tunnel, the claws, the archetype, all. Again, you know what I mean? Here's where I began to understand that I projected this archetype.
Yeah.
Went through the dark tunnel with the claws and the teeth and the gnashing and see the light up the end, head towards the light, you know what I mean? Get out into the light, there you are at sort of St. Peter's Gates. It's all bright and slightly sparkly and a bit misty, and there are sort of beings milling about in the background, just slightly out of eyesight. And they're standing there clearly in front of me, not Jesus, not St. Peter, me.
Yeah.
And I was pissed off. I was really angry.
Yeah.
And the person I was angry at was me.
Yeah.
And I kind of sensed myself almost like sort of prostrate on the floor
Yeah.
at my own feet, being admonished by me who was not me, in my voice, with my terminology, telling me in no uncertain terms that I was some kind of idiot. What the hell was I doing here? And that I had to get back to my body at once. And I remember distinctly feeling that wherever my body wasn't a particularly nice place, and that I'd actually quite like to stay here. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And this kind of ensuing argument where I got told in no uncertain terms that I wasn't supposed to be there and then, and piss off.
Yeah.
And on turning my mind away from this, I found myself back in my body with my friend lifting my head out of the toilet pan and trying to get some life back into me.
Well, you survived, and that's the main thing about it. Listen, Jack, we're wrapping up here.
Oh, Christ, we are, aren't we?
2 minutes left. Listen, I want to thank you very much. I enjoyed having you on.
I enjoyed it hugely as well, and I just hope that this has brought some sort of sensible picture to people whose picture isn't very sensible.
Yeah. There's more to this reality than meets the eye, and that was the whole concept of the argument here and the debate. And we not only that, we went through a lot of other stuff, and we'll just finish off on this one point that, folks, there is no piece of paper, there is no man, no woman, there's nothing written in stone of when you were sovereign or when you're not going to be sovereign. You were born that way. No one can tell you. It's your choice. You were given a choice. You came here. You got educated. You liked what you heard. You stayed. You became part of it. And you're sovereign. You don't need dates.
And don't be conned into contracting with society.
Correct.
And exchanging your sovereignty for some piecemeal security.
Yes. Well said. Folks, listen, I'm going to head off. My time's up. So listen, stay safe. Stay sovereign, and may your God go with you and bless you. Good night. God bless.
Good night all.